Let's bring in our panel of party commentators now, and lots to talk about today. Susan Smith is a Liberal commentator, Fred DeLorey is a Conservative commentator, and Anne McGrath is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Fred, welcome to our panel.
Thank you.
First time we've done this. It's good to have you here. Let's start with party platforms, and we had the Conservatives platform out just a little while ago, so let's talk about that. Why do you think this is the right platform for the times?
Well, it's about affordability. It's about helping Canadians get ahead. That's what our narrative and message has been for this entire campaign. And this is focused on tax cuts for Canadians and families, and also getting back to balanced budgets. That's something that's incredibly important. We have runaway spending right now in Canada. We have dark clouds on the horizons. We could be heading to recessions at some point, but we're already out of control spending. So we need to rein that in, and at the same time help Canadians get ahead.
Okay, Susan, let me bring you on that. Why is what the Liberals are offering? I mean, we now have two parties at the table here that are not especially concerned with the path to balance at this point. It's about keeping the economy chugging along, and Fred and the Conservatives on the other side saying, look, we got to get back to balance. That's the way to do it. So why is that the wrong approach for Canadians?
Well, I got up this morning and I read the news, and it said that in September there were 54,000 jobs more added to the Canadian economy in the month of September, and that the unemployment rate in the country is at 5.5%, which continues to be historic 40-year lows. So what that tells me is what the Trudeau government has been doing is working, and that is investing in families with the child tax benefit, investing in communities with infrastructure, and making the trade deals and doing the things that need to happen to get this country going. In contrast with the platform that the Conservatives have put out, we're looking at about $53 billion worth of cuts, $14 billion worth of unnamed cuts, but what they did name was another $1.5 billion in cuts to the public service. So they're talking about putting a whole bunch of people out of work. They're not talking about measures that are going to keep people working.
Okay, I'm going to let you respond to that. Sure. I mean, my reading of their proposals in the public service is that they're going to freeze the public service till the budget gets balanced. That they're saying nobody will lose a job. They're not going to deal with sick leave, contracts. That all stays.
Well, that's what Doug Ford told us. I don't know.
All right,
we'll see.
We're looking for look. There's lots of savings to be found in government. There's a lot of extra spending that goes on. Mr. Scheer's and others call it March Madness around.
Everybody always says that when they want to cut the size of government, and yet the savings never seem to amount. And we've seen different governments over the years look at savings. There's always something, but it never seems to be what everybody's talking about.
Peter, the line item in the budget talks about FTEs. That's full-time employees.
Right.
That's not March Madness.
But it talks about freezing them.
Well,
right,
those are big numbers associated with that.
It's because it's an easy thing to communicate to the public, because there is a perception around that. But I think it's true that there isn't all that much to be said. I mean, Jason Kenney did the same thing. He's got a red tape reduction ministry, I think, now. And you know, really the only way to do this is to cut jobs. And also to acknowledge that when you cut jobs, not by necessarily firing or laying people off, but through attrition and things like that, it still has an impact, because you're still losing those jobs and you're losing those services.
And it's in the combination. It was also announced today as part of this platform, Fred, that they're going to do away with a lot of the consultants. So I'm wondering if you freeze the size of public service, and I guess this gets into a long discussion about what the value of the public service is and how it works, and I think everybody will agree it's valuable. But the idea is, okay, so if jobs get added because there's more work to do in theory, and if you freeze the jobs, there's still more work to do. You bring in consultants, but this proposal from the Conservatives today says we're going to do away with a lot of the consultants too. We don't need consultants. So I'm wondering how that works.
Yeah. Well, there's a weird process in Canadian government, it seems, has worked out, where people work we have full-time employees, and then we hire all these extra consultants, which costs hundreds of millions of dollars. What we need to be doing is having investment in the bureaucracy and putting people to work there, and that's where I think we'll find a lot of savings. At the end of the day, we're also, during this budget process, the Parliamentary Budget Office, we looked into the infrastructure spending of the Liberals, and they had a $187 million program, $1 billion program they set up, and when the PBO went to infrastructure, they don't know where a lot of this money went or where it's going. They can't track it. They don't know what's happening. So we need to go into that as well and find out where this money is, and actually get things built in this country.
To be clear, it's pushing off. You're going to save $18 billion by pushing off, by turning this infrastructure spending from a 12-year program into a 15-year program.
And actually get things built.
And actually, but so where's the savings?
Well, it's over time that happens, right? Because it's not an annual.
So a little less spent each
Yeah.
year, spread over more time, but you're still going to spend the same amount of money at the end of the day.
But
it
it saves annually.
It is true that Mr. Scheer said that he had already announced all the big cuts, and then what he presented today, the largest cuts were ones that had never been announced.
I feel like I closed my eyes listening to Mr. Scheer, and I felt like I was listening to Stephen Harper all over again. And I feel like this platform is a bunch of little incremental things. There's no big vision for the country except to chop jobs and to chop spending. And it didn't work the last time. And whether you like Trudeau or not, you can't deny the fact that our economy is working well, that there are more people working than ever have been, that investment is up in this country, that things are getting built and people are employed. And families have money to make some choices. They don't have not every family has every dollar that they need. Government's always trying to do that. But the best thing you can do is have an economy that's working, where people are working.
So if there's value in, I'm going to start with Anne and come back here, if there's value in spending more money on programs, and the Liberals are proposing to spend more, there's no path to balance. And the New Democrats, they're proposing to spend $130 billion over the next 5 years, I think it is, on their program. So why should voters be thinking that more money spent is even better than the more money the Liberals would spend over and above basically deficit spending? Well,
Jagmeet Singh is proposing some really important things like the expansion of our healthcare system, dental care, pharmacare. He's proposing things in affordable housing. So he's got a lot of things that are on the table. He also has some ways of raising money to be able to cover off some of those things. But I think it's also important to remember that many of these things are good economic strategy as well. I think that like our healthcare system in Canada is good economic strategy, and improving that healthcare system will be good for the economy. Childcare has been proven over and over again to be very good for the economy. It improves the status of women in the workplace and in the economy. It creates jobs. It actually contributes to the gross income.
I guess then it becomes this argument. So like if $60 billion in spending over the next 5 years is a good plan, why isn't 130 a better plan? Why isn't the 270 from the Greens a better plan?
The problem with the NDP plan, in a nutshell, is it absolutely stifles any incentive for business investment and growth, whether it's new money coming into the country or for anybody else
to
try and move ahead. Oh my God, 75% capital. Yeah, well, scare business away. It'll scare Canadians from working too hard. I guess there's an old Johnny Carson joke about your income tax form, right? And I think this is the NDP income tax form. How much do you make? How much do you need? Give us the rest. And that's what it feels like from this NDP perspective. There's very little incentive from the NDP's platform for businesses to grow and invest, because they're just going to pull it all back.
What about that, Anne? Then Fred, I want you to jump in.
Well, I just have to say that one of my favorite moments in a campaign is when the Liberals start attacking the NDP. and that's what's happened today. That's what's happening in the last couple of days. Jagmeet Singh has had a very, very good campaign. He's done really well in the debates. His personal approval ratings are going through the roof, actually, and the party numbers are starting to now follow behind that. So, we become a target, and that's when the Liberals start coming after us. The truth is that Jagmeet Singh, not only has he had a good campaign, but he's put forward things that people want. People in this country, there's lots and lots of evidence, are really eager for us to have a pharmacare program. It will be good for people, and it'll be good for the economy.
Fred, let me get you to weigh in. Was there ever any consideration to, where did the 5-year balanced budget? I mean, or does it matter that you're happy being where you are, stuck in the middle here between two people who think spending is just fine and now the new normal is the debt to GDP ratio, not balancing books?
Well, 5 years, it's going to take 5 years to get the books in order after this Liberal government, after the incredible amount of spending that they've been going on. I will say to the NDP budget, their platform, I'll give them credit for at least they haven't fully costed. The Liberals, half of their platform hasn't been costed. It felt like during this campaign they were making it up on the fly. We saw the NDP came out with their cell phone plan, which got a lot of traction, and then within days later, the Liberals came out with one with no dollar figure attached to it. It was basically, we'll figure it out as we go. And that seems to be a way that they seem to be looking at how to do this.
Let me talk about what's happening. So we're seeing some really interesting stuff in the last couple of days in the polls. We're seeing this shifting around, and they're polls, so we got to be careful in their snapshots and so on. But when you look at them over the last week or so, you see a steady march by the Bloc Québécois in the province of Quebec in the polls. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the notion that maybe what's starting to sink in, notwithstanding what we've heard from both Mr. Scheer and Mr. Trudeau, and it was really evident in the French language debate last night where they both took on Yves-François Blanchet. One saying, you know, you're a friend of Mr. Scheer saying you're a friend of François Legault today and defending Quebec interests. The next day after the election, you'll be working for the Parti Québécois trying to get us a referendum again and working on sovereignty. And the Prime Minister saying a vote for Yves-François Blanchet, Prime Minister, Liberal leader, saying a vote for...
He's the Prime Minister.
Still is.
He didn't lose his title.
A vote for Yves-François Blanchet is a vote for more Harper rates in Ottawa. And yet the Bloc keeps moving up in the polls, and I'm wondering if what's settling in this narrative, if it's going to be a minority government, don't be scared off by what these two leading parties tell you. What are your thoughts?
I think that's possible. I think people have always voted strategically in the past. I think there will be strategic voting again in ridings across the country, and I think there'll be some Quebecers who decide that, you know, Blanchet in Quebec, in Ottawa, maybe thinking that he's going to do something for him might be worthwhile. Maybe rural Quebec is looking back at them again because they weren't so keen on the NDP. I still think it's going to be a minority government. But I think people will continue to vote strategically, which includes voting who they want to vote for, or also voting to make sure they keep somebody out.
There were two French language debates, and the Quebec voters looked at those two debates, and I think that they are disappointed in the Trudeau Liberals. They don't want to go back to the Stephen Harper days, and the progressive voters, I think, are looking at the Bloc and increasingly the NDP in the province of Quebec. Jagmeet Singh was there today, and it was impossible to move with him. There were so many people who wanted to talk to him.
Fred?
This is a fascinating election where it's not a change election necessarily where people are driving which way they're going to go. They're not sure they're going to toss the government out or not. It's more of a who do you want to see governing the province, or the country, sorry. And I think that's what's going to come down to it. I don't think it's going to be so much strategic voting, but it's who do you want to see as your member of parliament and who do you want to see in government.
Well, and what vision do you want for the country? And this is what I've been saying to people. I understand that people don't always like the leaders of each of our parties, but I encourage people always to look at the vision of each of those parties and the overall, like what they're going to do for the country and to the country. And I think people are going to be looking at that.
Well, I think that's what's really, I agree. It doesn't, normally in a change election, we see that in the polls. We see they ask a question, do you want change? And yeah, and then it's who do you want the change to be?
It doesn't even matter who they vote for.
Right.
Then, right?
We don't see that in this one. But what we do, I think what's kind of interesting with what you're saying is that if it's what's on offer and look at vision, clearly there's this stalemate in the two biggest parties in terms of vision. They're tied in the polls essentially. That makes me wonder if all of those other parties don't become more important, because maybe what people ultimately want is a little bit of everything. And they want everybody to have input, which means that's the minority election scenario, right? And then you can start to do the strategic voting. You can start to think of a lot of things as, you know, it's a little bit down in the weeds, but the weeds don't scare us here, right? We like weeds. It's the question, okay, well, if it's going to be a minority, which one? So if it's a conservative minority, how long could a conservative minority government actually last with this makeup of parliament? That starts to become a part of your formulation. If it's a liberal government, where do they find allies and what happens? I know that's well ahead of the game, but I'm not convinced people aren't starting to have that conversation.
Well, and I'm really hearing from a lot of people that they're kind of, it's bringing back the disappointment that there was in not having electoral reform, right? Not moving beyond the first past the post, so that you have the Liberals, for instance, saying, as they always do, you can't afford to vote for the NDP because then you'll get Andrew Scheer. And people are looking at that and going, yeah, but if you had actually kept your promise and done something on electoral reform, that would not be the case.
But still don't want Andrew Scheer.
No, but isn't all of that muted if you are convinced, as the polls suggest, it's going to be a minority parliament? So even if I get Andrew Scheer, I have all these other checks.
I think people
And even if I get Justin Trudeau, I have all these other checks.
I think, how do I want to say this? There's the national poll, right? And I think it does get skewed by the heavy concentration, for example, the Conservatives out west, right? I mean, that really skews the numbers dramatically. So I think when you look at the regions, the gaps are a little bit bigger than that. I think people are going to, at Thanksgiving weekend, sit back and say, am I doing okay? Is the country on the right track? Who can keep us going on this track, or who's going to veer it dramatically in a direction I really either don't think we can afford, etc. I think they're going to land on the Liberals largely. There will be some parts of the country where people change their mind. I think we're going to see a few more block seats than we thought, but.
What do you want people to think about this weekend, Fred?
Well, I think this is an interesting weekend. It is a holiday weekend throughout most of the country.
The whole country. Everybody gets turkey.
There's, in Atlantic Canada, where I'm from, it's not a stat holiday on Monday, unfortunately.
What?
Should be. So I think there'll be a lot of
Who's
discussions.
got that in the
about this.
platform?
Yeah.
That's okay. How come we didn't fix that?
10 more days. Canadians will be talking about this election this weekend because families will get together even if they don't have the day off Monday. They'll have this discussion, and what I think they'll be talking about is, is it time to get ahead? That's what we want them talking about. Is it time to actually go forward and to be able to have more money in our pocket and to see the country and themselves go ahead?
Anne?
I agree with both Susan and Fred that this is an incredibly important weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. I'm happy that it's happening now as we see the personal approval ratings for Jagmeet Singh rise incredibly, like dramatically over the last couple of weeks. People will be looking and going, I kind of like that guy, and they'll take a second look, and I think that the votes will move.
What'll be fun is to see as we can double check all this, like Tuesday, Wednesday next week. We can
Awesome.
start to see what the polls look like, and we'll see how much, we'll know what people talked about over the weekends, because it'll start to be reflected, I think.
Advanced
Thank
polls
you
too
all.
this week.
Exactly,
Yeah,
advanced
thanks.
polls, I was just going to say.
Yeah, this weekend.
Yeah, and it looks like the turnout's pretty good at
Yeah.
them, so.
Take care. Thank you.
All right, thanks.